This is the kind of talk that I most enjoy doing because none of you needs to be told any of Cloud 101. None of you needs to be told any of CRM. I'm able to talk with you folks as people who collectively, at least one of you, knows more than I do about any given aspect of our product. So I'm not going to attempt to collect all the amazing level of technical expertise that's been in the breakouts today. But I have an opportunity to do two things that I really enjoy. Number one, a closing keynote allows me to take things that I've heard over the course of the day and weave them into whatever material I have prepared. So there are 5 or 6 slides in here that have been devised over the course of the day to address points that have been raised here. And I like the chance to kind of knit things together and make people feel, look, there was a reason to come to this that was more than just watching the breakouts on YouTube later on. And that's important because this is a version 1.0 event. There's every reason to expect that next year's will be twice this size. Yes? There's every reason to expect that the steady march from Midwest Dreamin' in Chicago eastward to London will continue into France next year. And Germany soon after, or maybe even concurrently. There is every reason to think that this fantastic pattern of customers saying, you know what, this is no longer a relationship with a vendor. This is a community that is creating, that is defining a new career path, not merely in IT, but in business leadership, in government leadership, in education and healthcare. And I had a recipient of one of our Awesome Admin Awards in the Los Angeles event say, before Salesforce, I had jobs. Now I have a career. I couldn't possibly have written that line, but a customer spontaneously said it. And I hope all of you feel that you are here today as part of a body of career professionals creating a career that did not exist as recently as, certainly not as recently as 10 years ago, but arguably not even 5 or 6 years ago would you have been able to say to someone what it is that you do and have it recognized, appreciated, and respected at the level that it is now. And that's just tremendously exciting, and I'm really thrilled to be able to share that with you today. So the talk today is not about cloud. That would be like talking about indoor plumbing. It would, the fact that you were impressed by it would say more about where you come from than about whether it's actually impressive in its own right. And I made that comment to someone. He said, there is still a World Plumbing Conference. Well, I had Google too. And I was able to say, yes, but it's in Delhi. It's not in Chicago or London or New York. There are places in the world where delivering clean water in quantity on demand is still an accomplishment. Today, delivering computation, storage, and collaboration on demand is really not very innovative. The question is, what are you doing with it? And that's what we want to talk about today. Because there's a common expression, goals equals dreams plus deadlines, but I would like to extend that and say, yes, but plans are goals plus instructions. And the world is full of talks about the hype of the cloud, the hype of everything. And I want to leave you today with a couple of actual verbs, and not just some nice adjectives and nouns, but some verbs of things you could do differently next week. If you come to one of these events and you go home and you don't change your behavior on Monday morning, then arguably you have been merely entertained at best. People forget that the word information was a verb to inform before that wild man at MIT, Norbert Wiener, thought you could put a number on information. Which it was considered a radical idea. It was considered a crazy idea. Information was thought to be a state of mind, and the idea of measuring it, quantifying it, was considered to be kind of a fringe idea. Well, the problem is we did too good a job. Now everyone talks about bits, or megabits, or yotabits, or zettabytes. And we forget that information's not supposed to be mass, it's supposed to be force. Information is supposed to change things and not just sit there in a great big putrefying pile, which is what too many IT projects do. Ovid once said, add little to little and there will be a great pile. Well, he said it in Latin, but. So let's talk about this. It's odd to realize how often I'm asked to come in and talk to an organization about something that has nothing to do with CRM or even IT. They ask us to talk about how do you build a culture of innovation? What's the future of application development? What about this wearables stuff? How's that going to change the world? What is the role of tomorrow's CIO? I get that question a lot. There are still some people who are really apprehensive about the idea of all these services and whether it makes the IT department irrelevant. I want to make it very clear. It makes the IT department more valuable than ever. And when I brought this list of topics that I speak to customers about all the time to the organizers, what I got back is, this is what we want to hear about. Can't do all 12 because we've got other sessions during the course of the day, but this is what we're going to be talking about today. What it means to be in and of and to create and promote a culture of innovation, not only for yourself, but for the people you serve, and your external customers, how you drive your organization forward, and what is the future of work. Now, the thing is, these are not separate. A culture of innovation is what drives a company forward and makes possible the future of work. So let's kind of unpack the sequence here. First of all, innovation, commonly confused with invention. But Peter Drucker famously observed, if it doesn't get adopted, it's not an innovation. The world is full of inventions, yes, Hannah, I'm looking at you, that have no adoption, that catch no fire with anybody. And Drucker's point is, only your customer can tell you if it's an invention. This is, innovation. This is something that we say at Salesforce all the time, because engineers can say, here's the product. The lawyers can say, here's the terms and conditions. We delivered the product. It meets the specs. We delivered it at the price. You have to pay us. You have been sold. But only in the mind of the served person does an act of service occur. When you are a service provider, by definition, only your customer gets to tell you if they were served. And that's such an important distinction between a technology vendor, which is what lots of people in the world are today, and a services provider, which is a cultural shift from what IT has always been about. And notice the last question. What do we have to do today to achieve results? The world is full of 3-year roadmaps, full of 1-year plans. And the question that I want to give you some answers to today is, what am I going to do on Monday that's going to be different because of conversations that I had here today? So I boiled this down and said, okay, the right definition of results depends on input from your customers. Your customers are defined as someone you must satisfy. I do run into people in healthcare, government, any number of activities who bristle at the word customer. They think it's beneath them to have, customers. We don't have customers. We have clients. We have patients. We have students. I'm sorry. If their satisfaction defines whether or not you did your job, get off your horse and admit you've got customers. Okay? And if you don't have anyone you can identify as a customer, I'm not sure what you're doing. I don't know what occupation you could have in which there is no one whose satisfaction defines whether or not you did your job. And you should always be going to those customers in a systematic quest to find out from them, what do we need to do today? Now, the problem is, so often the customer has no idea. Steve Jobs was famously contemptuous of focus groups. He said, they don't know what they want until I show it to them. The problem is, number one, he's dead, and number two, when he was alive, he wasn't scalable. And we need to find ways of making all organizations capable of intuiting, preferably in a reproducible and scalable way, what would these people love to see that we can do before they've even asked us, and certainly before anyone else has done it. How do we do that? Well, the key adjective is systematic, and here's some more Drucker. Once you start quoting him, it's like potato chips, but let me boil it down. There are only a certain number of places you can look again and again and again for opportunities to innovate. And here are my favorite 3. Look for incongruities. Look for situations where you say, how is it possible that this is true and this is true at the same time? There's such an obvious contradiction there that if I can figure out how to resolve that apparent contradiction, I will have created something that the world will say, yes, I really, really needed that. They won't know they needed it. So often people, think of the most atrocious problems as if they were like gravity, as if they were just something you have to tolerate. They've forgotten that these things were ever choices in the first place. And sometimes exposing the possibility of doing something in a fundamentally different way is itself an innovation. There's new knowledge. Sometimes there's stuff that we know how to do that we just didn't know how to do before. And very rarely pursued, is changes in perception. When I started at Salesforce 9 years ago, I could make you a list of all the things I was told cloud would never be used to do. Can cloud be used in a regulation and compliance-intensive environment? Can cloud be used to do enterprise ERP with all of its mass and customization needs and mission criticality? People would say, oh, no, cloud's not for that. Cloud's for ordinary stuff. Cloud can handle your email. Cloud can handle your customer contact database. And now, of course, it's virtually impossible to find any of those examples that don't have counterexamples. You big organizations, little organizations, mission critical, regulation and compliance intensive, global, whatever. I can show you examples of all that. More to the point, doing it yourself is no longer seen as what real companies with real IT do. Doing it yourself is seen as what stagnant companies with entrenched legacy systems do. Increasingly, the most secure, most scalable, most reliable, most agile and innovative platforms are understood to be the platforms that are 100% cloud. It's difficult to realize, if you've only been in this business for maybe 5 or 6 years, how huge a change that is from 9 or 10 years ago. So my incongruities are my favorite place to play because we've had a lot of fun with them at Salesforce. For example, Mark famously asked, why do people have things like Amazon and Google and eBay that they use at home? They don't take training classes to learn how to use them. They don't complain when they change and get better. They just say, cool. And they are gorgeous. They have high fit and finish. They work beautifully. And then they go to work. And they've got stagnant, aging, moldy green screen crap that they have to take a class to learn to use and a 3-week process of pain and suffering every time someone wants to make the slightest change to it. That was a massive incongruity, and that was arguably the borning of Salesforce, came from the recognition that there was a question that could be answered there in a productive way. Well, a few years later, Mark stood up in front of a group of his senior managers and said, how many of you are on Facebook? Hardly any hands went up. And he said, LinkedIn? Practically every hand in the room. But Facebook was for college kids. Everybody knew that. Well, Mark said to us, I'm on Facebook, and I expect to see all of you there. This is the future of our industry. He didn't mean frivolous conversation. He meant systems that self-organize, that recognize what you need to know, that bring it to you with powerful algorithms and allow you to discover stuff without having to go hunting for it. Google PageRank has the problem that it shows you what everybody's looking at. Facebook shows you what people like you are looking at and draws you into conversations you should be part of. So that's where we went to create things like Chatter and Communities. Then Vijay at EdgeSpring stepped out of a meeting where they were talking about the schema for an enterprise data warehouse that maybe 3 months from now would start to generate some value. And someone said, oh, where do you want to eat dinner before we go back in there? Someone pulled out his mobile, and within 30 seconds, they'd found a Mexican restaurant with high reviews within walking distance of where they were. And Vijay said, what the heck? He may not have said heck. Why is it that we're in there talking about the schema for a database of a relatively static population of enterprise records, but we can come out here and navigate this irregularly structured and constantly changing database of all the restaurants in a major city from a handheld device? That was Vijay's moment of incongruity, and we bought EdgeSpring, and turned into Wave, and now it's got, Wave in the analytics cloud because it has scalability and irregular data and so on. And why can't marketing look at the customer over the arc of a customer journey instead of just in the snapshot moment of a sale? That, of course, is where Marketing Cloud came from. And just yesterday, I added a new one, which is, how come we can't get past ease of use? What if I don't want to have to use it? What if I want it to tell me what I should be doing? What if I need recommendation capability? Sure enough, I added that yesterday, and this morning I saw this piece on Harvard Business Review that says not only for organizations but for individuals, measuring data, quantifying performance, and continuously augmenting it is the only thing that's going to keep jobs and organizations in existence. If you're not measurably and consistently improving, you're gone. An algorithm can do that which does not change. So enough about us. What about you? What about media and entertainment? You may realize that when Twitter went out to do its public offering, they took people from the TV networks with them. Why? To discuss the transformation of the media consuming experience from everybody watching the same program at the same time to a new thing where people are tweeting in real time about what they're watching, where a community is actively involved in augmenting that content. Now, that's one very interesting side of media today. The other side is the problem of people who are not all watching the same thing at the same time, but are watching whatever they want whenever they want it. I have 3 sons in their 20s. None of them owns a TV set. They consume Hulu, they consume Netflix, they consume lots of content, but they do it on their own time, at their own convenience, on whatever device they feel like using. How on earth do you get people to pay attention in this environment? Well, every now and then you get something convenient like the World Cup or, the Super Bowl in the U.S. where they claim to be playing football. No one else in the world calls it football. Or the Oscars or whatever. Well, look at a company like Red Bull. They look like an energy drink maker, but they run like a media and entertainment company. And when Felix Baumgartner jumps from the edge of space, for 5 minutes of real live wall clock time, the whole world is asking, did he make it? Did he make it? Did he make it? And the Red Bull logo is all over that event. They've got a stable of like 15 of these extreme athletes. They can create an experience on demand, and the whole world watches. This is how you do this. This is how you make yourself a creator of experiences so that every time someone pops the tab on that little Red Bull can, they can feel like Felix Baumgartner. Aspirational membership in that community and not merely consumption of an energy drink that anybody else could make. The world is full of people who've been writing PhD dissertations on supply chain optimization that have become kind of, I think the word is antique, because now instead of having to inventory components, we'll just inventory the specs and print parts on demand. I am not talking about plastic belt buckles and troll dolls here. I'm talking about my son at SpaceX, where they print titanium rocket engine parts. I'm talking about people in laboratories that are working on being able to print a pancreas. Yes, a real pancreas, not a medical model of one. I'm talking about printing with organic materials. I'm talking about printing simultaneously with plastic and metal in such a way that an object is produced with all of its wiring already built in, instead of being added on later. Lighter, stronger, more reliable. You can now print a drone. Really, you can print the actual drone with the wiring all set. You can actually do this. So it redefines inventory and changes the question about what about physical assets? What do you own compared to what do you just generate when you need it? It's not quite the Star Trek replicator where you walk up to the hole in the wall and say, I want some Earl Grey tea, please. But, give us time. Give us time. Give us another 10, 20 years. What about healthcare? Whole discussion around healthcare has changed. Why? It used to be very simple to measure actions performed at the point where you performed them. I know what pills I gave you. I know what procedures I performed. I can charge you based on my activities at the point of service delivery. Now, how did that work out? Well, gosh, your actual health outcomes, that happens somewhere else, days or weeks from now. How can I close the loop and bring the data back and figure out how to charge you for your wellness? Surprise. We can do that now. We can give you discounts on your life insurance if the data off of your Fitbit says that you're behaving yourself. We can actually measure effects that are removed in time and place from where we performed the activity and start to bill you for outcomes achieved instead of actions performed. This is fantastic. Everybody loves this idea, except the people who processed all the records in the old system. And financial services. Everyone used to know how the financial services marketplace worked. You get out of school as a young adult, you get a car loan. A few years later, you get a home loan. A few years later, you start actively saving for retirement. There was a nice ladder of progression through the financial services where you take on larger and larger amounts of debt as you become more and more secure and established in your life. Okay, maybe not so much now. You graduate from university, you're already under a mountain of debt. Meanwhile, you don't particularly aspire to own a car. You've got Zipcar and Uber, and the economics of living in a city and owning and parking a car are not actually all that great. The financial services industry is just completely in chaos at the moment because they no longer have a clear handle on what path you're going to follow, when you're going to buy stuff, when you're going to borrow stuff. Everything is up for grabs here. And so the question is, what has value in the financial services world today? And increasingly, what is it? It's not performing transactions, because I can do that off my phone. It's not just providing raw data like market movements that you used to be able to get only on a Bloomberg terminal, because I can get that off my phone. Actually, I can get that off my wrist. It's providing domain knowledge and trusted advice so people feel like they've got a partner in achieving life goals and not just an agent performing transactions for them in marketplaces. If you're getting a common thread out of all this, it's that all of these things now are not so much about performing the function that used to define a provider in a business, but about stepping out of the box of that function to look at the experience that people are trying to have when they buy that product or consume that service, and then asking yourself, how do I brand and create and differentiate a community of experience around what I used to call my product, around what I used to think was my business? We need to figure this out pretty quick, because if a robot can pick it up and an autonomous vehicle can deliver it, and an algorithm can price it, and can copy it with a bit stream, and a collaborative community can teach each other how to use it, what's my job? Instagram was bought by Facebook when it had 13 employees, arguably taking over the role of consumer image management that used to be handled by 140,000 people at Kodak. Now, yes, that's the tip of two different icebergs, but the tip of the Kodak iceberg also included the guy at the chemist's who hands you your enlargements, and the guy at the store that sold you the frames and other things. Consumer imaging imploded into a tiny little business in terms of the number of people who can make a living doing it. And the question had to become, well, what do I do if I'm in what used to be that business? And I don't claim to have the answer to that particular question. Fortunately, everyone's heard of Moore's Law. They always misquote it. They always say that Moore said that the computers would get twice as fast every 18 months. He never said anything remotely resembling that. What he said was the number of transistors you would put on a chip would double every 18 months. For a while, that meant more speed. Now it just means more and more processor cores on a single chip. If you're going to put 1,000 processors on one chip, there are a handful of companies in the world that can take advantage of that, and we would be one of them. We can still have Moore's Law alive and well in our pods. It is not alive and well in your iPad or your laptop. But there's a better law. Bill Joy's second law. No matter who you are, most of the world's smartest people don't work for you. He thought there was a company up in Redmond, Washington, another one in Redwood Shores, California, that needed to have this pointed out to them. Not to mention a little ERP outfit over in Germany that sometimes seemed to think it had too many of the world's geniuses working for it. And then there's IBM, which actually does have a lot of Nobel Prize-winning scientists working for it, but most of the world's smart people work for someone else. And this has been evaluated in a lot of areas. If you don't create an ecology that is all the world's smartest people saying, hey, you know what? I can create what I want to create better here than anywhere else, well, then they become value adders in your world. Why not create prediction markets? Why not, get out there and use structured, proven mathematical methods and emerging tools of data science scalably, reproducibly, and consistently to gather all of this knowledge and bring it into a community that elevates your brand into something much more than it could ever be on its own. This is a radical notion to large companies that have this, idea of, we got to do all this stuff inside our own wall. Here's some examples. Philips is well known as a Salesforce customer with a tremendous record in innovation in its own right. Their reputation for innovative skill is so great that they've been able to productize that reputation into a business unit called Philips Innovation Services. I want you to think about how clever this is. Smart Philips people go and visit other companies that have demonstrated by inviting them that they're eager to become more innovative and learn. I guarantee you the Philips people come back to the home base having learned some things along the way, but they got paid to make the trip. Wow. Other companies pay Philips's most talented observers of innovative opportunity to come and look at them for a little while, maybe make a few suggestions before they go home. But in the meantime, Philips has turned this into a revenue stream. Fantastic. Absolutely brilliant behavior, and totally based on the idea that looking outside their walls is a profitable way to do things. You may not know Diageo by name, but you may know some of their brands. You may know some of their brands better than you should, and we'll talk about that later. But they had a different approach. They created their own venture capital firm. They fund clever people with ideas that might be relevant to their business, and maybe they license them, or maybe they acquire them, or whatever. But again, they're structurally exploring the implications of Bill Joy's second law. There's a lot of intelligence out there in the world, and they're creating a cultural norm of going out there and finding it and bringing it in, making it work in their garden, to use the metaphor that was made in the earlier slide. When you start to think about customer communities, and of course Erica led with this idea today, the importance of thinking of the world as collections of communities. You realize that you can't sell from the outside in to these connected communities. You can't. They see you coming, and they immunize themselves against you. The word gets out. No, don't listen to that guy. Just pure sales pitch. Don't even bother answering his calls. You need to join those communities and be a participant in those communities instead of trying to sell in from the outside, because geography doesn't define access. What matters is the network. What matters is who knows whom. Why does this matter so much today? Before the customers could talk to each other as easily as they can now, everyone pretty much knew what the rules were. Your rep negotiates with their buyer. It's all about terms and conditions and specifications and price and delivery. But today, people are collaborating on a lot of other criteria. You might have someone in the room who says, yeah, these guys have the low price, but we're going to be embarrassed by their record on child labor in emerging economies. We're going to be embarrassed by their animal testing. We're going to be embarrassed by their environmental behavior. There's so many more people now who might raise their hand and say no. And in a room full of maybes, one no is one more than you can handle. How real is this? Well, there's Volkswagen, which did not have their problem detected by a national testing organization. There a couple of university students stuck a probe up a tailpipe and said, "What's this?" And then they were able to tell the whole world, and the whole world listened, and within a couple of weeks, one of the world's largest corporations had 1/3 of its market cap disappear. So I'm not talking something that might matter someday. This isn't Alvin Toffler in 1970 talking about future shock. This is something that's happening right now. Real-world consequences happening in a matter of days or weeks, where major corporations are finding their world changes because community power, fed by and supported by these communication networks, is changing the way things happen. This is something that just came up on Facebook yesterday or today. I invite you, if you have a Facebook account, to take note of that URL and find out what Facebook's estimate of your degrees of separation from the world is. You thought 6 degrees of separation sounded pretty cool? Facebook says I'm at 3.25. Slightly worse than Mark. Cheryl is really connected at 3. It's interesting to think about that. Now, of course, this is only Facebook's data. There's a very nice discussion of how they approached the computationally formidable task of trying to estimate this for as many different people in as complicated a network as they have, and you may enjoy that from a data science point of view. And then you start to imagine all the other networks of which you are a part. But the notion that on average I could get from anywhere to anywhere is alarming. If you think you're under control of your enterprise communications. Now, again, I want to make it clear, this is operational. When we turned on Chatter in 2010, I have always, at Salesforce, worked as a remote employee out of my home near Los Angeles. I immediately felt as if I were in the office, except that I felt as if I were in the San Francisco office, in the London office, in the Sydney office, every day. And the characteristics of Chatter that make it work are identifiable. It's not scheduled reports, it's event-driven. It's not hierarchical communication. If I need to, communicate with someone else, I form spontaneous task groups at Salesforce all the time without ever having to navigate my way up the tree to find a common point of supervision who can authorize us to work together, which is the way things absolutely did work for me in some of the other companies where I've been. Many people don't realize how automatable Chatter is and how measurable it is. But if you look at that bar down there with the red dot on it, talk about transparency. Anyone's personal profile at Salesforce has one of those things on it, and the farther to the right that red dot is, the more people are actually paying attention to your stuff. And so for a while, we would invite the 20 highest rated influencers in the company to the global management meetings, whether or not the org chart said they should be there. And if they had two managers above them who weren't being invited, and they were, that definitely got some attention. And Mark Benioff went to his board of directors and said, right now I can only promote people to senior director if they have no direct reports on the org chart. I need to be able to promote people 2 levels higher to senior VP, even with no direct reports. Because we've got quantitative data now that show that these people have the influence and the significance in the organization of a senior VP, even if nobody actually works for them. We can measure this stuff. And you can measure this not merely within your own walls, you can measure this within your customer community as well. And people are always saying to me, oh, all this social stuff, this is just for B2C. I'm sorry, it's for B2B too. The execs who make the purchases are in fact now part of online communities and are making more decisions on bigger budgets more quickly because of the confidence that they derive from these informed conversations with trusted advisors. They're not selling the product. They're selling the experience. And Gartner has estimated that as of this year, 90% of companies expect to find that the experience they provide is their more powerful differentiator than any technical criteria of what they used to call their product. In this, they are echoing what Tom Peters said in 1987 in Thriving on Chaos. Thriving on Chaos is my favorite Tom Peters book because in the preface, he apologizes for In Search of Excellence. This is not widely known. After all, there was a TV series about In Search of Excellence. But when Peters and Waterman went back and talked to the so-called excellent companies 5 years later, they discovered that the ones who were doing best were the ones that had changed the most. And the ones that had stuck most tightly to what they thought were their so-called excellent behaviors were in fact not doing particularly well. And ever since then, Tom has been saying variations on adaptability is the only sustainable excellence. But the key point that was being made by Gartner is that the experience you're providing is going to be your main differentiator because capital can come at you across a national border in a moment's notice. Talent can cross borders. Intel can have chips designed in India to be manufactured in China, taking advantage of the engineering talent in the one place and the infrastructure in the other, and do just fine. The mobility of capital and talent is so huge. Now, Mark Cuban put it in very simple terms. We're not in the basketball business. We're in the business of creating experiences. If someone wants to watch a basketball game, he can sit in a leather vibrating chair at home with his favorite beer, within reach in a bathroom that has no waiting line. I want him to spend $100 to drive into town, sit in a less comfortable chair, and watch the same game. I'd better be creating an experience that wraps around that game and just treats the game as just kind of the nucleation point for something that's actually worth enjoying. Now, in this, Mark was echoing what Walt Disney said 60 years ago. When Disneyland was founded, he said, do what you do so well that they'll want to see it again and bring their friends. Now, Walt at the time never thought about the possibility that, quote, bring your friends, unquote, would mean not just knock on the neighbor's door and say, hey, come on, let's go down to Disneyland together, but that you would be having friends in other countries, friends around the planet, friends you may never have actually met face-to-face, but with whom you have conversations all the time. I'm a ham radio operator. Having conversations with people you'd never met used to be a cool thing to do. And now people say, what? You need that? Now, the thing that's important to appreciate is that a lot of this is thought to be associated with, oh my gosh, we've all got phones. Everybody's got a smartphone. That's what's changing the world. In another few years, The phone is going to be that thing you used to look at all the time, but now it just sits in your purse or your pants pocket or your briefcase, and it's just your node of radio communication with the things that actually are interacting with you, with all the devices that are in your environment. And in fact, at some point, we'll realize what an antique idea it is to carry around a phone at all. I want to ask you a little thought experiment. Does any of you walk around carrying a flashlight because the next time you walk into a room there might not be any light? You kind of expect that when you walk into a room it will either be lit up or there will be an easily locatable switch that you will flip to get light in that room. This is the way we normally live. We are in the flashlight era of connectivity. We're all carrying around our little flashlights of connection called smartphones, because after all, the next room we go into might not have a wall screen and something that recognizes our identity from some little RFID token we're carrying and immediately starts offering us access to everything we want to know. We can deliver that stuff. You've seen Minority Report. Peter Schwartz, who works for us at Salesforce now, was one of the people who designed those environments. And if you go to the Nebraska Crossings Mall in Omaha and you walk into that mall, well, right now your smartphone is vastly underemployed there because all it is really doing is telling the mall who you are, and you immediately start getting targeted, personalized offers based on who you are, what you buy, who you know, what friends of yours are there. This is real. This is not a movie set. This is one of those things that's going to burst upon us with startling speed. Now it's been proved that it's possible. Because these things that started out as, $500 devices are already down below 100 US, and these single function devices are rapidly going to be eclipsed by the highly extensible and programmable devices. And it's going to happen with speed that many people will find remarkable. You guys are too smart to think that that's unusual. And eventually, as I say, you don't carry devices anymore. The environment itself is smart. This is from that wonderful Corning video, A Day Made of Glass, which is a fantastic visualization of environments in which every wall, every surface is offering you information and rendering function. As I thought during the demo jam today, why carry a device when the exactly compensation component can be wired directly to your pleasure center? Or, for that matter, to a shock collar, depending on whether you're about to do an unreasonable discount. Now, the thing is this, and one of the things that I definitely want to equip all of you to do you ever remember the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer, when the chess coach is yelling at the parents and saying, there's no greater crime than to give a child the desire to win without equipping him to do it? It would be a crime for an event like this, or for that matter, an event like Dreamforce on vastly larger scale, to have a whole bunch of people leave the room ready to win, but not having been given the tools to overcome the obstacles that they will find when they get back to the office. Here's the biggest one you will find. You will walk in there saying, we've got to become leaders in user experience. And the boss will say, where are a leader in user experience? Well, I'm sorry, it is not mathematically likely that 80% of the world's manufacturers are superior in customer experience. This is called Dunning-Kruger effect or Lake Wobegon effect, depending on what group you're with. But in the same way that most people believe they're better than average drivers with better than average sense of humor, most people believe they're better than average in customer experience. And if you're going to lead a conversation like this, be prepared to marshal data. Be prepared to draw data from social media, from Google, from other quantitative sources to say, no, I'm sorry, we're not. We are not superior in customer experience, and being cheaper, faster, and better is not going to cut it anymore in a world where people can mutually reinforce each other's pursuit of superior customer experience. It's going to take behavior change. There's a phrase I use sometimes, is that if customer behavior change is the problem, your behavior change is going to have to be part of the solution. We can't tech our way out of this. In the words of the character played by Matt Damon in The Martian, we can't just science the out of this. We're going to have to behave our way out of this. Because connection is now so pervasive. Not only are there as many active cell phones on the planet as there are living human beings, but half of them have broadband. The result is that you've got literally 1 billion people a day on Facebook alone. Notice how most of them are mobile. Most of them are outside the US and Canada. This is not just, a Silicon Valley thing. And the result is that people, according to IBM research, are more influenced by what their friends are buying and what they're saying about where they bought it than by any other marketing they can do today. So we got that Super Bowl thing coming up this weekend in the US. A lot of companies are going to spend $5 million for a 30-second ad. Today, the biggest accomplishment you can hope for with the Super Bowl ad is that people pay you the ultimate compliment. They ask their friends, are these guys actually any good? And if that vigorous, informed, loyal army of customer advocates doesn't say, oh yeah, then that ad is just going to wash on by. Going to go out into space and be detected by aliens someday, but it's not going to affect any purchasing behavior. And that's one-to-one, people-to-people. What about the devices? What about already 2.5 devices per person that are connected? What about traffic going from 20,000 to over 1 million terabytes per month between now and 2018? What is all that data going to do? How is that going to change stuff? Is this just industrial automation? No, it's not. It's not. One of the problems with the phrase Internet of Things is that it ignores how many kinds of data there are. And so many Internet of Things exercises are going to do the wrong thing and cost too much and not deliver the results they should. And I want to make sure you guys leave here ready to have a conversation that goes beyond the level of the In-Flight magazine article on the wonderful future of the IoT. At least 4 kinds of thing data with different trade-offs. If I'm just asking, where's this construction crane, that answer does not change materially from 1 hour to the next, or maybe even from 1 day to the next. There's other kinds of data which is valueless 10 microseconds after it's first collected. That's a very important question. Important questions of what's the downside risk of being wrong? Important questions of what's the complexity of what I'm going to do with the data afterwards, because, the internet actually means something. The web is HTTP on the internet, and the internet itself is a fairly heavyweight protocol called TCP/IP running on a fairly unreliable system called DNS. Well, the world is full of other ways to connect stuff. For example, machine-to-machine protocols that are much more lightweight. Protocols with names like weightless. Guess what their claim to fame is? Why does this matter? Well, for example, when Apple brought out the watch, they spent the beginning of the launch event talking about the HealthKit protocols. Tremendous opportunity to change the whole character of medical research by having much more data collected lots of the time directly off of people's bodies instead of under the unusual circumstance of coming to a doctor's office. You're not getting representative data when they're sitting in a chair, having their blood pressure measured. You want that data from your real-life experience. Manufacturers of devices are complaining to Apple that by making the requirements for HealthKit so stringent in terms of encryption of the data and so on to protect data confidentiality and integrity, that they're making it too expensive to produce the devices. And Apple is saying, tough luck. Moore's Law is going to give us the cheaper hardware sooner than we can recover from you guys with your cowboy protocols screwing up the whole space of personal medical data measurement by being careless about data protection. And I think it's terrific that Apple has taken this principled stand that the protection of the quality of the data is paramount, even if it delays the availability of the hardware until the technology can catch up with that. I think it's a fantastic statement. And the point that I want to make here is that people are always asking me, what's going to be the operating system of the IoT? My reaction is, what's the operating system of the human body? If I touch a hot object and my finger jerks away and then I notice that it hurts, what has just happened? Well, a very small local processing loop that went from fingertip to spinal cord and back jerked the finger away. And then a somewhat slower process sent a signal up to my brain, and my brain said, oh, that hurts. And then a much more elaborate process thought, that's not supposed to be that hot. I'm going to file a trouble ticket with maintenance. There's 3 different operating systems involved there, handing things off to each other to do simple things very quickly, very cheaply, and affordably, while other things that take more cognitive processing get offloaded to other resources. And that's the way we have to think about a world of connected devices, is simple stuff happens very close to the point of action, very quickly, very inexpensively, and more complicated stuff begins to collect more and more resources, and eventually we start to take advantage of big data techniques. But that's the way we have to be thinking about this, about what we do this. Is big data going to be required? Absolutely. You look at the opportunities. We can save enormous amounts of money in healthcare. We can save enormous amounts of money in the public sector. We can dramatically increase margins in retail. The opportunity is vast, but here's the problem. In the same way that the word cloud is not a registered trademark, and any idiot can slap the word cloud on anything, big data has unfortunately become characterized by the word big. Well, bigness is not the most important point. Walter Wriston at Citibank once said, a lump of lead sitting on my desk is a paperweight. Give me a slingshot or put it in a gun, it's a bullet, and it's a whole lot different thing. And I want to put this in very quantitative terms. A 450-pound chunk of lead isn't good for anything except being a mobile X-ray barrier. All it does is get in the way. A somewhat lighter chunk of lead, only 12 pounds, in a ball, well, if I'm a massively built Olympic shot put thrower, I can actually do something with that. But I guarantee you, if I threaten to throw a 12-pound chunk of lead at Matt Morris when he's more than 5 feet away from me, I don't think he's very frightened by that. I'm not built that way. And an 8-gram chunk of lead, properly aimed, is actually something I can do stuff with. So guidance, navigation, and control of data are at least as important as its mass. And I'm seeing so many people talk about big data as if the magnitude of the effort of collection is the most challenging thing. But the question of what's the guidance and navigation and control of that data? How are you picking your targets? How are you verifying that you hit your targets? There's a lot more opportunity for creative and insightful value to be added in that part of the conversation. Here is the problem. In 1/3 of organizations, all that data is going to be treated as history instead of as news. Management experience that disagrees with the data will result in the data being buried in the bottom drawer of the file cabinet and never seen again. If management says, that can't be true, I've been in this business longer than you've been alive, I don't believe it. And there's the end of it. Many organizations are, what was the phrase that was used by MIT Sloan School? Analytically challenged. And so they wind up doing cost reduction. And the thing is, you start collecting this data, and you start getting insight into operational costs, and you cut an operating cost by 10, 20, 30%, and the ROI is fabulous, and everybody checks the box and says, what a successful big data exercise we've had. Not realizing that you've put yourself in the bottom 7/8, which is never a very fun place to be, because the top 1/8 are doing that. Prediction, prescription, recommendation. Daring the data to change their view of how the world is actually working and being prepared to go through painful change as they are informed by that data. What did I say before? The verb to inform means to change the character and behavior of things and not merely to dump a bunch of bits on top of them. Doug Engelbart gave a demo called The Mother of All Demos in 1962. He demonstrated cutting and pasting with the first crude computer mouse, which he's holding there in his hands, a wooden box with rollers. And he talked about combining human intuition, powered by exchangeable data notation, using machine intelligence to augment human intellect in 1962. And this is a very modern vision. The question is, what the heck took so long? Well, we just didn't have this atmosphere of connection that we've got now. And arguably, many people who are talking about the so-called, what they call the cloud, still don't get it. If you showed up at the starting line for a 26-mile marathon run, and they said, oh, wait a minute, before we start, here's the map of the course. We need to know how many breaths per minute you'll be taking at each point along the course before you can proceed. That would be called capacity planning. And if you have to spin up virtual machine images in an infrastructure cloud, that's what you're being asked to do. Well, that's nonsense. When you want to breathe deeper, you should be able to get more air. That's the way things should work. That's the way things do work in the Salesforce cloud environment, where you don't manage things like virtual machines. You just, ask for what you need when you need it. We have connected the planet. Annual growth rates of bandwidth have been huge. Since most people in the room probably don't integrate in their heads, I'll put it in factual terms. We put as much new bandwidth into the planet in 2014 as the whole planet had in 2011. That's how quickly this is growing. People keep saying, oh, it's got to level off, it's got to level off, it's got to level off. I'm sorry, as long as there's professional sports and pornography, the demand for more bandwidth will never go down. And the result of increased supply is, Economics 101, price collapses. That is the trend line for 10 gigabit per second connections between Miami, Sao Paulo, Hong Kong, and Tokyo. Oh, the lines down there at the bottom that look like they're the x-axis, that would be, like New York to London, London to Paris. It's essentially free. If you design systems today as if bandwidth is global, universal, infinite, and free, you will be wrong, but you will be getting less wrong every day, as opposed to people who are still designing systems as bandwidth is intermittent, expensive, and slow, who become more massively incorrect with every passing moment. And it is not a rich world phenomenon. We are giving the developing world internet and cat videos way faster than we gave them clean water. We are measuring the temperature of vaccine refrigerators in Haiti on Chatter. We can verify the integrity of the cold chain of delivering medicines to remote parts of the world on electronic networks that are just out there handling people's sales reports and just using the interstitial time that the networks provide. There are routers using Twitter to provide global analysis of traffic patterns so they can optimize local network switching behavior. This is what a world in which there's an atmosphere of infinitely breathable connectivity can give us. And the result is that the most important differentiating asset for a company today is, how connected are you? Don Tapscott, who wrote Wikinomics, said, first generation humanity, how big are your muscles and how big is your army decided how much power you had. Second generation, how big is your factory and how many people punch in and out every day decide how much power you have. Third generation humanity, how big is your network and how much influence do you have in it? That's not a matter of physical assets. It's not a matter of physical power. It's a matter of connectivity and the intelligence to use it correctly. And so the old competitors could easily be identified. They're right there in the classified phone books on the same page as you. You buy and sell the same stuff, hire and fire the same people, sell essentially substitutable products. That was easy. Who's your new competitor? You can't identify them by their advertising because they may not even be buying advertising. They may be discovered by people as viral services. What category of the business is Uber? What category is Google? If Apple started a bank tomorrow, a large percentage of people under the age of 35 would be perfectly happy to do their banking with Apple, or with Google, or with eBay, or with PayPal, or with Square. Imagine if they started putting ATMs in the back of Uber cars. Let Uber become a bank. Let your ATM come to you. So who's your competitor now? If you don't even think of Amazon, Google, eBay, PayPal, Square, or Uber as a competitor, your list is not long enough. A friend of mine who was at ADP at the time said, when Google comes into your market, they don't just eat your lunch. You wake up in the morning and they're in your kitchen making breakfast. That line never fails to get a nervous laugh from a room because everybody understands what it means. Everybody understands that reality. And the question is, how do you get on their lists? What are you guys going to do on Monday that begins the process of making everyone else scared to death of you? That's a good question. It's a fun question. How do we get everybody else reacting to us for a change? Because the goal of the day today is to get you guys ready to take the power you should have to change your organizations and delight your customers. What are the skills of the future workplace? What is computational thinking? It is not bits and bytes. It's seeing trends and patterns of data. It's understanding the nature of data. What is creativity? It's seeing incongruity. It's seeing things that could be done in a way that's not incrementally better. What is social intelligence? Thinking about influence networks as something that exists outside of the walls of the company. Do you know that 1/3 of the searches on LinkedIn are people looking for a subject matter expert inside their own company because they have no other way to do it? They have no knowledge discovery tools that function within the walls of their own organization. We can do better than that. We can make that not true anymore. Now, in the session just before this one, this is the freshest slide in the deck today. The session just before this one was asking the question, do you need to know how to learn to code? Well, before our first child was born, I did say, let's teach him Lisp, and if he turns out to have anything worth saying, we can teach him English. He's at Google now, speaks English and Mandarin, because his wife was born in China. So that worked out all right. No, my wife didn't actually go along with the experiment of teaching him predicate calculus first. I'm sorry. But MIT's course, Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs, was considered a breakthrough because it didn't begin with the mechanics of programming languages. It began with the idea of abstraction, of finding patterns and building tools that embody patterns and worrying later about what language you'll use to implement them. It's not about learning languages. It's about learning a way of thinking about the flows and the patterns of stuff. Do you need to write code to do this? No, but do you benefit from being able to think in code? Yeah, and I want to give you a very simple thought experiment on this. When you turn the key in your car, most of the time it just works. And if nothing happens at all, most of us immediately will have some sense of, oh, I probably need to jump on the battery. But if the engine cranks and cranks and cranks and doesn't catch, most of us will probably say there's probably something wrong with the fuel. We never really need to get hands-on with the battery and the fuel system in normal everyday use. But when something goes wrong, we can start moving in the direction of solving the problem much more quickly if we understand at least one level deeper than we normally use every day. So when people say, I don't need to learn to code, I'll never write code. That's kind of like saying I don't really need to know anything about gas or batteries to drive a car. Most of the time it's right. The times when it's most important, it will turn out to be wrong. And the other question that was asked, in fact, from the front row by Nitsan, who was in the front row now, is what's the role of the admin? Should we be deprecating the title of admin? Does it put us in too narrow a box? There's a very interesting question there, because should we be saying admins should be called business analysts or business partners? There are some more controversial alternatives that I could offer. We could be called he or she who must be obeyed, because after all, if it's not in the system, you don't get paid. They could be called the Terminator of the legacy stacks. I commented once that so many admins were brought in by their organization thinking they were just bringing in a Roomba to clean up the contact list, and they wound up with a Terminator that's going to go out and slaughter all the legacy stacks. Or they could be wearer of the Ring of Power, which is my personal favorite. But, it doesn't really look right on a business card. But on the other hand, people do know what a Salesforce admin does. It's becoming a highly employable skill. I'd like to think that rather than changing the name, we can change the perception. We can, go like Drucker and try to change the perception of what that name means. And as one of my MBA professors once observed, Stalin never held a title bigger than General Secretary of the party. And he seems to have done okay. So staying up to date, staying up to date, what does up to date mean? Up to date means staying inside your box and repainting the walls once in a while. Constantly changing skills, asking yourself, what are the things that we're not doing at all, as opposed to the things that we could incrementally improve? What are the areas in which a PayPal, an Uber, a Google, a Square, an eBay could just come at us, and with superior knowledge of our customers, gleaned from relentless, voluminous observation and analysis of their behavior. Peter Sondergaard at Gartner recently said, the digital company does not ask people what they want, it measures what they do. It observes what they're trying to do and intuits what they need that they could not yet articulate themselves and would not be able to describe in a focus group. But you can see the patterns of effort and frustration that will lead you to the recognition of the incongruities that will let you create amazing things. So originally I asked, questions that are worth asking and answering. What's still urgent? Superior execution, enabled by experience, learning, optimization, and automation. What's worth owning? If there's not a good reason to own it, shed it. Get it off your assets list if it's not really an asset. If there's not something more than habit or turf protection. What's the real differentiation? The world is full of companies that have picked a metric and improved that metric every year. There was one company, for example, that proudly mentioned in the annual report every year, oh yeah, we got the average order fulfillment time down this year from 1 week to 2 days, from 2 days to 1 day, from 1 day to half a day. Well, what they were selling was paper day planners. I don't know if you've ever used a paper day planner, but you order your refills when you turn the page for the last month, and the first page on the last month says, don't forget to order your refills. And a new CIO actually went and checked and found that 90% of orders came in at least 3 weeks before they were needed. And so same-day shipment, almost completely zero customer value, even though they'd been spending money to chase the bunny of that metric every year. So what differentiates? ask that question not from the point of view of what metric can we improve, but what customer experience can we improve. And be prepared to acknowledge that some of the things that were very expensive to create are no longer terribly valuable. They're depreciated, move on. That may also relate to skills that you've spent years of mastering yourself. Sorry, be prepared. It took me a long time to get my Morse code speed up to 24 words per minute. I don't ever expect to be paid to use that skill again. Sorry. And it's our job at Salesforce to allow you to be asking these questions instead of things like, how are we going to do that upgrade? This is a version of our architecture you may never have seen. It has no Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, Marketing Cloud, or anything. It's there as a reminder that the actual thing underneath at the very, very bottom is the most unusual thing we've got. The database in which collaboration's wired in, security's wired in, the ability to do amazing stuff at scale is built in from that moment, and from there on, being able to layer on services like workflow and mobile user interface and create the ecosystem that just celebrated its 10th anniversary proceed in a very natural way upward from that foundation to the point where the bubbles across the top are really not products. It's not that there's a platform that extends the products, it's the products are specializations of the platform. This is a model of presenting what we do to customers that I've only started using in the last 3 or 4 weeks. And many of them have just had lights going on over their head and behind their eyes saying, I never really thought about it that way. And ask yourself that question. How many opportunities do you have to turn a conversation upside down and instead of trying to take what we've always thought we did and do that a little bit better, can we turn that conversation upside down and ask, what's the need people have that makes them come to us at all? And how can we enlarge the envelope around what we do to make us the custodians of that need? How do we do that? And how do you do that for your own role in an organization? Get beyond the box you're in the org chart. People worry a lot about technology replacing people. Booth School of Management at Chicago University looked at this question of, given that the cost of capital has been practically zero for the last 5 or 6 years, people can borrow money to buy a robot now for practically nothing. They found that in every industry, in every market, geographically and otherwise in the world, the substitution of technology for labor has accelerated dramatically for that simple reason that you can borrow the money to buy the robot for less than you ever could before. And the productivity of the software is greater than it was ever before. And there are people who fear replacement of people. But the people who are in value-creating roles of crafting and delivering customer experience, of being customer-facing and of being creative collaborators with the customer, their jobs are not at risk. Garry Kasparov is one of the world's best chess players. He's commented on something called freestyle chess, in which human teams are free to use any computer techniques they want. And he's found that the best chess-playing programs don't win those tournaments, and the best human chess players using programs to augment their talents do not win those tournaments. That the teams that do the best job of looking at the patterns surfaced by the technology, finding incongruity, finding opportunity to do something a little bit off the edge, consistently are the winners of those tournaments. That the strongest process is what wins. And if I were to tell you when you were born that someday a double amputee would be thought to have an unfair advantage in a world-class sprint race, you would have said, what? But the combination of the right technology with the right talent and the right desire to win is what is winning in the world today and the world that we're going to be living in for the rest of our lives. So the purpose of an event like this today, I'm sorry for all the people who couldn't get in because they sold out, but the purpose of the event was to give you guys an unfair advantage. So for heaven's sake, run with it. Thank you.